What's up? Decided to make today a sports theme day. Got my Penn State wrestling shirt on, my Saints mug, Bass Pro hat. Trying to do a little theme. Kind of fun, huh? Hey, hope everybody had a good weekend. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to learn the quadratic formula. Now, the thing with the quadratic formula, a lot of teachers just give you the formula, show you how to use it, and voila, it works. I think it's important that you know where it comes from and how it's derived. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to do that, and then I'm going to have you guys try it, see if you can do it. I have a feeling a lot of you might look at it and go, what is going on? Don't worry. We're going to practice it a little bit, and after a while, we're just going to have the formula, and we're going to use it to solve quadratic equations. So if you notice up here, I've got a quadratic equation up there in standard form, meaning instead of having numbers for coefficients, we have A, we have B, and then we have a constant of C. So we're going to use those letters. So the mathematicians that went before us, super smart dudes, right? They decided, hey, we're kind of sick of completing the square, right? It's the same old thing over and over again. So they decided to make a shortcut by taking this guy and solving him in a generic formula using completing the square. The formula that results at the end we can use to solve any quadratic equation. So that's what we're going to do today. Now we've got to remember back to a couple things about completing the square. Thing number one with completing the square is we've got to get a new C value to make that thing factor as a quantity squared. That's what it's all about. In order to do that, however, the second part is we must have an A value of 1. So when we're looking at this generic form, the first thing we know is we have A in front of x squared. We don't know if that's a 1. We don't know if that's a 7. I don't know if it's a -2. I have no idea what it is. So I want to make sure it's 1. So that's the first thing that I'm going to do. So the first thing I'm going to do here is say I need that guy to be 1. The only way to ensure that it's 1 would be to divide out by it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to divide both sides here by A. And I hope you can see this. Got to write kind of small. This is going to take several steps. Now, when I do that, of course, the A's here would cancel out. You're just left with, switch my colors here. We're just left with x squared. When I do bx divided by A, we're going to write that as b over a x. And when I take c divided by a, that becomes c over a. And of course, 0 divided by a, well, that's just 0. So all we did so far was divide out by a to ensure that our x squared has a coefficient of 1. Now, big thing with completing the square. We want to make sure that we get a new c value or a new constant value that makes this thing factor as a binomial squared. So I'm going to get rid of that one and get a new one. So I'm going to subtract c over a from both sides. Remember we did that and we leave our little gap in there to get our new constant value. So that's going to come over here and that's going to be negative or opposite of c over a. So divided by a, make sure that guy's 1. Got our c over a value or our constant over here because we're going to add a new one. Now, how do we add a new one? Well, that's where we did our b over 2 quantity squared thing. In this case, however, my b value is not just b, it's b over a over 2 squared. So I'm just taking that value, putting it over 2, and squaring it. We did that several times. We even did it with some fractions, I think. So when I do b over a over 2, that really becomes b over 2a squared. And that's where we take note of this. Remember our little cheater thing? We'll now know how that factors. So now we're going to square that. B over 2a squared is simply b over 2a times b over 2a. And if I'm going to do b over 2a times b over 2a, it makes sense that that's going to become b squared over 4a squared. Think about that for a second. B times b is b squared. 2 times 2 is 4. A times a is a squared. So that's my new c value, or constant, that I'm going to add in. So trying to keep this all separated, I'm going to add that b squared over 4a squared to both sides. Now, looks messy, but we know how to factor this because we have our little cheater. We now know that this guy's going to factor as x plus b over 2a quantity squared. That's that little cheater tells us exactly how it factors. Now, this other side, that's a mess. So what we're going to do is we're going to play a little cleanup game here. Let's go off to the side over here. I've got the opposite of c over a plus b squared over 4a squared. I can't add those. I mean, they don't have the same denominator, can't add them. But what we can do is we can get them to have common denominators, just like we would with any other fraction. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, well, what's the common denominator between a and 4a squared? Remember us doing our adding of rational expressions? We did this, unit 13, I think. So I look at those two and I realize, hey, my common denominator is actually going to be that 4a squared. So I'm going to turn that a into 4a squared. And what I do to get that is I multiply this by 4a. So I've got to multiply the numerator by 4a. So the opposite of c times 4a is going to turn into negative 4ac. Take a look at that. You know how to do that. So this whole thing becomes negative 4ac plus b squared over 4a squared. Now remember we talked about putting things in standard form. That's where we go degree first, then alphabetically second. Technically this b squared should be first, and that's how you're going to see it in the formula. So when we bring it over here, instead of negative 4ac plus b squared, I'm going to write that as b squared minus 4ac, and that's going to be all over 4a squared. So step by step, little by little, it's ugly, but we can handle it. Now, this is where we look at this and go, okay, we've got this factored as a quantity squared. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to square root to get rid of it. I'm going to square root to get rid of it. Don't forget your positive and negative. Now over here, simple. That just gets rid of the square. We have x plus b over 2a. Now over here, well, that's a little bit uglier, but it actually cleans up nicely. We have plus or minus that square root of b squared minus 4ac. And underneath here, the nice thing about 4a squared, it's a perfect square. We got it from taking 2a times 2a. So I know the square root of that is 2a. So I just left the plus, positive, negative up there with the numerator. It could be out front. It doesn't matter. I'm going to leave it in the numerator. My last step now is to subtract the b over 2a to solve for x. So when I do that, I'm going to have x equals, when I subtract b over 2a, well, I'm just going to get a negative b over 2a. And then I have that plus or minus root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now the beautiful part is they have the same denominator. I can put them all together in one fraction. So this is going to be negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Ladies and gentlemen, that is what's known as the quadratic formula. Again, a lot of teachers just give you this and say, use this, solve your equations with it. I don't want to do that. I want to make sure you understand where it comes from. So here's what I'd like you to do. I would like you to stop the video. This is going to end the video out. Rewatch it if you want, slowly. Think about each one of the steps. Then I want you to start with the original quadratic equation in standard form, this ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. And I want you to try this on your own. If you have to go back and reference the video, do it. Okay? And then keep trying it until you can put this down and work all the way down to there. It might take some time. It might take some doing. Some of you might not be able to do it. I think we all can. I think it's a good thing to be able to do. So rewatch this if you have to. Start with the generic form. Work through it. If you get stuck, find the part in this video that shows you where to go. Keep working through. Do as much as you can on your own. Then try it again. After a few tries, 3 or 4 tries, everybody should have it, I think. Then we're going to learn how to use it. Hey, I hope you guys all have a good day. I'll come to you again soon. See ya.